It's great to be here. Thank you. It's an honor. I've been shooting photography for probably 50, 60 years, and the last probably 10 years doing it professionally. Last year I retired, so now I'm retired from the work and retired from photography. But Keith and I, we just came back from a trip. We went to Iceland and Greenland, and we spent about 22 days there. And what you're going to see in the presentation,
if I can get rid of the message box,
is our activity there. And I want to start out with some stuff that we've done in Mandarin. And
I can't find the cursor. So we have two different screens. So
I'm going to change.
So I can't find the cursor. It's a problem. Here we go. All right. Figured it out.
He's good at this.
Apparently not that good. All right.
Okay, so we're going to talk about three different areas. We're going to talk about some stuff in Mandarin real briefly, and then talk about Iceland and Greenland. Does anyone here know Wayne Wood or have heard of him? Great. Well, in 2 days, he's going to be introducing his new book, and it's a rewrite of Jacksonville's architectural heritage, and this time it's in color. And I got to help him do part of that. I did part of the Mandarin area for him. And if you would, I mean, this is, if you're a photographer and if you're looking for places to shoot and objectives and all this kind of stuff, this book would be a great resource. Again, it's being released in 2 days. Wayne is going to be at the Church of the Good Shepherd. He will be doing a slideshow there, and we'll be doing book signings there. So I would encourage you, if you want to really get up on photography around Jacksonville, this would be a great resource for you. One of the things I did for him, and I'll show you an example of some of the work that's going to be in the book. So this is where pretty close to where I live. I live maybe a mile from this location, and Wayne explicitly had me come back to this location 6 times because 5 of the times I couldn't get it the way he wanted the building to look. So this is a HDR, it's a pan. It's a vertical pan, so I shot the bottom part of the image, and then I tilted the camera up and got the top part. And being an HDR, there's about 5 shots in each one of these, so it's a combined image of that. And what Wayne likes is to show the architectural structure of the building. So not only do you shoot the front of the building, but you want to have some of the sides of the building in it. That's the problem with this location. The sides of the building just, kept having other elements that I could not get a really nice, clean image in my mind. There's air conditioners and ugly structures and wires. And really the front of this building is the main theme. Now, me being from Mandarin, trees are an important element in my photography. So I'm always trying to capture the environment that the building's in. And you can kind of see that here. Now I did this project in 2021 during the pandemic, which was a great time to do that. I didn't really have to get out and meet a lot of different people. It was working in the community. I photographed maybe 30 different locations, and 20 of those locations Wayne used in his book. But I was supported by the Mandarin Museum, by the Mandarin Community Club, by Susan Ford, who's another author who just produced a book, and by Wayne, whose book is coming out in 2 days. This is an example of one of the residents that I photographed. It's also in his book. This is a William King house. And this home has 6 gardens associated with it. Another view, this is backed off again, showing the trees that are around the home. You can see one of the gardens right off to the left of the image. And the property is under a land trust, and they're doing that because this may be a future Mandarin park someday. It's not yet. But the house, the oak trees, and the gardens are protected with this trust. And part of the condition for the trust is to bring small groups of photographers and other people to this to do photography around it. We also have had the University of North Florida, their opera, come and sang. So there's different events that occur here, but it's by invitation and it's small groups, and it helps fulfills the trust. So I mentioned there were gardens. So some of the photography from the garden, this is macro photography, and in this image, it's made up of about 30 raw files. Another version. This image kind of caught my eye because of all the lines in it, the geometry that you can kind of see in the image. And again, what I normally do with my camera is I pick the point that's closest to the lens, and that becomes my starting focal point, and then I do additional focuses after that. And the camera does it for me automatically.
The camera takes the images, it doesn't process them into what you see.
Right.
And that's one of my images, similar, same from the same garden. Olis and I went out there one morning. Just really love the shape and color and texture in that image.
Yes. Sure.
On your using Olis, you're using your stacking and you use the shallow at the same time.
I am. You saw the f-stop on that. And the reason I did that, doing focus stacking, you know, you don't have to have a real broad f-stop. So I'm trying to pick the optimum f-stop for the optics of the lens. So instead of using like f16, I'm using like f4.5 or f2 or something like that, and letting the stacks, good point, gain the rest of the image structure that I need. So, you know, overall, I'm trying to get a better image.
You are using the camera to do the focus stacking. You're not
Yeah, the only focus point I pick is the starting one, and that's normally the subject closest to the camera lens. That's where I start at. Then there's a menu that you go into in the camera where you can tell it how wide you want each area of focus to be considered, and then how many of those areas you want. And one of the nice things about the camera I'm using is I can say shoot until you hit infinity, and it will automatically quit. So I normally tell it to shoot about 200 or 300 images, and it will normally shoot about 20 or 30, and it's hit infinity and it quits. I'm using Nikons. This is probably either a Nikon Z7 II or a Z9. Okay, we're going to now talk about Iceland and Greenland. So if you look at the top part where it says planning, those are the time period that Keith and I talked back and forth about this plan. And the start of that back at 5/20 is basically of 21 when COVID restrictions worldwide started to lift. So that's the time point that happened, because immediately when that happened, this company called Red Sail Photo Tours opened up touring. And the day that I saw that announced on Facebook, I was on Keith saying, Keith, we need to jump on this.
You have 2 hours to decide. Are we gonna spend all this money and go on this trip?
And it's not an insignificant trip. So he agreed, yeah, we'd take a look at it. And the next thing that was important to me was a full moon, because what I wanted to have happen in my mind, I had a red sailboat in my mind, I had an iceberg, and I had a full moon. That was the criteria. So I called the company back and asked them what dates were they sailing where there was a full moon. They gave me 3 dates in this year where they did that. And for each of those dates, I used some software for that particular date to see how high the moon was above the horizon. Because sometimes when people say there's a full moon, the moon is below the horizon, particularly when you're up in the Arctic. So those are things anyway, that was the date that it worked out of. So once we knew the date, the next thing was, we talked about Iceland, going there, and to figure out based on the moon phase, do we want to go to Iceland before we do the red sail trip in Greenland, or go there afterwards? And we looked at the phase of the moon, and it turned out that going before worked out better. It gave us darker nights, so we had a shot at auroras. Anyway, that was our theory. And for each of the days on the trip, I had one of these, which was a plan. Keith and I worked this out. Each day we had precisely picked where we were going to go and where we were going to shoot. Now, the thing behind this that nor Keith or I realized and understood was that for 2 years, everyone who wanted to do world travel didn't do world travel. So when world travel opened up, guess who else was with us?
Everybody. And the weather had no idea that we all wanted to be there and do the right thing. So. So this is, part of the presentation today, we're talking about drones and how you add drone into your landscape photography. So this is a drone image. It's a HDR stacked pan image. So probably 15, 20 images go into this particular image. And the interesting thing, the thing that I like about this image is this is impossible to get with a camera because it's about 20 feet below where we're standing. So we're standing back over here and I had to fly the drone down below where we were standing to be able to get the water. Otherwise you would just shoot over the top of that one rock in the middle. Yes.
So that drone meant to be static, while you made those 15 or static.
Yeah. Yeah, the drones these days are really pretty good at just, you do nothing and they just sit wherever you put them. So when you fly it somewhere and you just don't do anything, it doesn't do anything. It's just going to sit there.
So compositionally, if you were standing up 20 feet above, this one center rock that you see, would have been below the horizon line of the rocks behind it, which would have reduced, the effect. So that's cool.
And no chance to get the water or any of that other stuff.
Right.
Without being able to use a drone on this.
So I mentioned everyone else was in Iceland on the dates that we picked, and some of the key spots, some of the waterfalls and that kind of stuff. They had, since the last time I was there, it used to be like a gravel road where you'd pull off on. Now it was asphalt and tour buses. So when we got off to do a shoot, there's 200 people, 300 people standing around the falls. So what we had to do is, use our apps and pick trails and paths and roads that were away from where all the tourists were, which was basically all that plan we put together for a year. And this is an example of some of the stuff we found. At this particular spot, we just had really nice lighting and the horses were cooperating.
And the nice lighting lasted a very short period of time.
On this trip, the nice lighting lasted this day. This was it.
Yeah, that's just maybe it.
So for the next 20 days, we basically had rain.
Yeah, Olis and I were, probably 30 yards apart from each other, and he was shooting the horses and I was shooting, I had an IR camera and I was shooting the horses with the landscape behind it. And these horses, there was probably a dozen of them, but 3 of them just slowly were eating grass and working their way closer and closer and closer to me. And this one finally just came right up to me. And Olis was there to capture
And actually, if you look carefully, you can see Keith is protecting his camera and he's not really petting the horse.
I'm gonna.
So this is in that same general area where we're trying to find alternative things. This is kind of an interesting shot because it's from 100 raw files. It's a pan. It's 9 different positions. Normally when I'm doing a pan, I'll shoot. But each time I did one of these shots, I did a focus stack. That thing we talked about earlier when I'm shooting flowers, where you start at the very front and go up to the back. That's why for these 6 positions, I've got 100 counts, because in there's focus stacking going on. And the tool that I use once I get back home on my computer to bring all those stacks of focus together is called Helicon Focus. And again, you can see I'm shooting at an f-stop 4.5 versus something like f16 or something along those lines, because I'm trying to get the optics of the lens at peak performance.
And the other interesting thing about this image, besides the fact that it's a beautiful image, is this is a lava field. And they have, in these lava fields in Iceland, this moss that grows on top of the lava. And so that's what you're seeing, this the soft stuff that you see in the image is like a moss that grows on top of the lava. It's just, Iceland's just full of these really amazing.
I don't know if you
details.
can see it because of the resolution of what we're seeing here, but on my monitor, if you look in this bush right here, it's not just a regular bush, it's a blueberry bush. It's full of blueberries, in addition to the moss. Another point out in this same area. And this is another focus stack because you can see detail in the rock and the gate. And if you look in the back, that sign back there on the church, it's also razor sharp. So off about 20 yards from where that church was,
It was a lot more than 20 yards.
200 yards. 200 yards, because I was hurting coming back. This boat was out there, which was kind of interesting. I did a black and white with the normal camera, and then Keith shot this shooting infrared.
I like to do pans. So whenever I'm out, I'm always doing pans. And in the end, I figure I can crop the pan however I want. But I thought it was nice to get the boat and the sheep in the same picture. So occasionally we would run across sheep. You might see a few more in the presentation. So here's an example of using the drones to get a little closer. So this wreck we saw from the road is probably 2-3 miles away, and we were able to go down this little gravel road and get closer to it, but we're still at least a half a mile away. So I did a little hike and I got a little closer to it, but there was still, as you can see from the video, a large amount of water between me and the boat. Olis stayed back at the original spot.
I did. And okay, so my drone is a half a mile from where I'm at. I can't even see the boat. I'm just back at the car. I'm flying the drone. I'm looking through this little screen and I can see what the drone is seeing. And I navigated out to this position. So we talked about stability. This is a 40 image shot. This particular shot, this is a pan, 8-position pan. And I did bracketing at each of those positions, five bracketed shots. So the total count is 40. So that's kind of cool stuff with drone technology. And then flying the drone around a little bit more, I got this angle on it and converted this image to a black and white.
And this was as I mentioned before, Ola stayed back at the car. I decided to hike out to get a little closer to the boat. And I came over this one little ridge and these sheep popped up on the other side to greet me. I think they were as surprised to see me, maybe less surprised to see me as I was to see them. But you can see the boat in the background there. So there's still a good ways from where I was able to get on my hike to the boat. So the drone is really important here to be able to get, the views and the perspectives that you can't get just from, wherever you can plant your tripod.
So in this particular image, it's a pan, and again, I keep getting tourist in the image. I don't know if you can see it, but back by the waterfall, there's this guy in these white pants and a dark shirt.
Is it me?
Yeah. But from his position.
Yeah, so that's my image. So this is a 3-shot pan. Each shot I had to do 7-stop bracketing to get, the dynamic range between the inside of this cave and the clouds in the sky is just incredible. And yeah, that's Olis over in the corner.
So we're getting in each other's images.
There's actually a little path that walks around. There is a place where you get quite wet, from the mist, but there is a little path that walks around, and where I was standing was, let's just say I didn't want to go any further.
He would still be there if he went a little bit further.
Yeah, it was not pretty. So.
Another example of flying the drone out. This is about a half mile from where we're at. There was no way to get to this spot. And when you look at this from a half a mile away, the waterfall, it looks insignificant. It's like, why are we wasting our time here? It's just a little ribbon of white that you see. But when you can get your drone and get out there and get the shot, and on the way there, Keith was doing some shooting.
Yeah, so I didn't go all the way to the waterfall. Olis has a little bit of range, I think, on his than mine. Mine was acting strange. So the waterfalls came out and all this water, flowed through, and I was looking straight down and really trying to get these sort of abstract looking images, just looking, straight down from the drone. I thought this was really kind of cool looking. And another example of that, looking straight down, this was on the black sand beach, just looking straight down as the surf would come in, and That was kind of interesting, a little different perspective. This is another example of some of the really amazing landscape that you see. This is a Savertophos fall, and yeah, so it's basalt columns all around this falls, and this was one that I had to hike quite a far ways out to. Olis probably has the same exact image from about 5 or 6 years ago when he was there, so he refused to do the hike with me. And he said, be back soon because we're going off to do something else. And so I did a very quick hike out to this. It was a lot more than I thought it would be, but I think it was kind of worth it. So the interesting thing about this image is the falls were kind of dark. It was a cloudy day. And to get the proper exposure, normally I would do just like a bracket on it. In this case, I did a bracket, but then what I did was I picked one of the brackets that I liked the texture of the water, and then another that was just at the right exposure for everything else, and just blended those two together just to get the texture of the water the way I wanted it in the falls.
So I'm still looking at drone distance. In this case, this was my record. This is a mile. I flew the drone a mile away from where I was standing. And not only did it go out a mile, when I got there on this particular image, I did 12 pan positions, a total of 60 raw files. Now, where Keith and I were standing, see the lake there? It goes way over this way.
Yeah.
And there's another large hill with a little parking area on top of it. And that's where our cars and where we were at.
I didn't have the guts to fly that far. This is just some other images. I didn't feel like we could really ice them without showing Diamond Beach. So Diamond Beach is where icebergs cab off these glaciers and come out, and they end up on this beach. And you usually, most of the images you see, which we would have really liked to have been able to capture, are with the sun coming through the icebergs. We didn't really have an opportunity to do that. We just never caught the sun in the right phase, but I kind of like this black and white for the beaches. And then here's another example of a drone in the Glacier Bay area, right near the Black Sand Beach. So this is another example of something you just couldn't get without using the drone. So I flew the drone out and did an HDR pan directly off the point of this iceberg, and I kind of thought it was a pretty dramatic shot.
What?
Yes.
I'm not too familiar with drone photography, but is the drone taking the pictures or is it communicating with your camera?
Oh no, the drone's taking the pictures. So there's an automatic setting in the drone to do the bracket. So the way it works is I use my phone. He has a different controller, but the phone connects to the controller so I can see exactly what the drone sees. And then basically that's the camera. So it's almost like using your cell phone as a camera, but the drone's actually taking the picture and it's stored in the drone. You can, yep, there's a bracketing setting. You can just say, I want to do a 5-stop bracket or a 3-stop bracket, and it just goes, and it just does it real fast. And then you put them together.
But you do get a shutter button right on your camera,
Yeah.
and you can. In my case, I can control my ISO, my shutter, my aperture, all of that kind of stuff. I control just like I would on a normal camera. You point it just like you do on a normal camera. Pretend you're on a tripod,
Mhm.
and that's what it's a tripod that will go a mile away, and you can control the lighting and the angle and all that. Go ahead.
On the computer side, I know a lot of micro sensors,
Mhm.
full frame,
Mhm.
you guys have preference on that?
Oh,
The bigger the better.
the bigger the better. Exactly. The bigger that you can get to your drone to carry. Yeah, for sure. Better. Yeah, the bigger the sensor you have, the better the noise. It'll be able to handle the noise usually.
Are you using the built-in camera or?
Yeah. We haven't graduated to I've been talking about it, but we haven't got there yet. Because that's the one thing I do want is a better camera. So mine is the 2S. It is a fixed lens. His actually has a zoom capability on his. So yeah.
And a variable aperture, so
yeah.
I control that.
This is a time lapse that I did. So I did a presentation for you guys a while back on time lapse. So this is a time lapse. So we went out this morning. Think we got up 5 or 6 times in the middle of the night to see if there were any auroras out. And finally I got up at 3 or 4 in the morning and said, Olis, we got to go. I think there are auroras, because I'd never seen them before, but I'm like, the sky is all green. So by the time we got out to this one spot, it was really beautiful for a few minutes. And then the sun started coming up, and it's still a really beautiful morning. But the auroras were not amazing that morning because of the fog and the proximity to daylight. So this is so we went to another spot after the Glacier Bay. This is the Vesterhorn. So you'll see, we'll have a few more images of the Vesterhorn. We spent some time there. We did get lucky there with a few things weather-wise. So this was a morning shot as the sun's rising, a 3-stop bracketed image that I just, kind of fell in love with this particular image. It's just, I don't know what to say about it. They call these haystacks or something. That's really beautiful. This is a really cool image, one of my favorites from the trip, actually. And it's there's no hocus pocus on this. So this is just a straight up HDR bracketed image. The reflections you see were the reflections that were there. Olis will show, I think, on the next slide, some details about how this was captured. But essentially, there is a very shallow area where the tide comes in. So if you catch it at just the right time with the tide up, the water's only a few inches deep here. And the stillness that you see that allowed to capture this reflection lasted for maybe 2 minutes. So it wasn't like that when I walked out, and within a minute of me taking this picture, the wind had picked back up and this image was gone.
I knew I wouldn't make it, so I decided to grab my drone. And if you look carefully in this image,
You can see me out there.
yeah, Keith is in there. See? There he is. So I'm right by the car with my drone. Keith is faster than I am. I think it's an age thing. So, I mean, he's nailing that image. It's beautiful. And what I do is, all right, I'm looking at this scene saying, all right, here's one shot that I can get. What else can I get here? So I'm looking at the composition, and I'm looking out toward the ocean. And so I'm going to head that direction. The next shot is me flying out there. And then what I'm doing is, all right, I want to get right over the beach and look at the structure. Let me see what that looks like. And there I am there. All the time, Keith is back there getting that reflection shot. Just the point is, with a drone, I mean, if you've got good optics and ability with it, you can zoom that thing around and buzz and get some interesting shots. Now, one thing about this shot kind of ties into the next image is if you look at that point of land that's sticking out in the water, but if you look beyond that, you see another little land mass out there with a couple of little bumps on it.
Way in the distance. Yeah.
Way in the distance. So after Keith and I finished this shot, we got in the car and we drove for what, 40 minutes? And we got here. Those are those 3 little bumps that you see, we saw in that other image, that little point picking out behind that one. And if you launch here, I'm launching my drone out, and that's Iceland back there, and I'm out over the North Arctic Ocean.
And this is from the parking lot. I did a little bit of drone work, but I also had to grab my IR camera. The light on the mountains was just too nice. So this is an infrared image with a bracketed pan of the mountains. And then this is my drone image. I like the crashing water. So I try to get down close to it. It's a little dangerous, I think. You're kind of like, oh, how close can I get to the water and not actually lose my drone? But yeah, playing around with that a little bit. It's fun.
So then we saw the weather forecast for the auroras, and it sounded like that night would be good. And the problem we were up against is, like all the other days there, it was 100% pretty much cloud cover. And this is the spot we were at when the clouds broke. We went back to that other spot back down the road.
So we did we set up our cameras. So remember the reflections, I thought we were going to get the reflections, which we didn't. But this is a highly compressed about a 4-hour time lapse. I cut off a lot of the beginning, but we did a time lapse for about, I think it was about 4 hours, about 3,500 images processed. The interesting thing about this processing is that I learned that you can actually do a topaz denoise batch process. I don't know how many people use topaz denoise, but you can do it in a batch mode. So yeah, it took a long time. I'll just say that. But it was a really nice video.
And then while we were shooting, we both had time-lapse cameras running. We had other cameras, and with our other cameras, we were doing different compositions with it. This is one example.
It's the only night out of the 21-day trip that we really saw good auroras.
And they were everywhere in the sky. Anywhere you looked, it had aurora in it, and it lasted for hours and hours and hours, which was really cool.
Yeah, that was the hotel.
That was where we slept. And the room was about the size of two of these tables put together, including the bathroom and the double bed that we had.
It's very small. Very small.
So on this particular night, the next day, I'm looking at news reports where they're reporting it was a G2 level geomagnetic storm. So apparently the sun was really acting up really nicely for us that evening.
It's very lucky. So this is talking about some drone video. We've mostly showed you stills. So there's also some things in this video that you should not do, and that's let the drone blow out some of your highlights. But it's really hard. So this was a waterfall that we found. It was down in a canyon. There was absolutely no way to hardly even take a picture of this waterfall without a drone. But a few things when you're doing drone videos. So you want to keep your shutter speed about a 50th of a second. Gives a little blur. So it's more similar to the motion that you expect to see in normal videos. Try not to blow the highlights. You always want to use really careful, slow movements. You don't want to have those jerky motions. You can do some settings inside the drone for how to make it go really slow, but it takes a lot of practice. Figure out the path that you want to fly for the video and fly it, and then come back and fly it again, and then come back and fly it again. Every time you'll get a little bit better. And then I mentioned here D-Log versus movies or MP4s. I'll talk more. I think I'm supposed to come back in November of next year and talk more about drones. So I won't get into much there, but that's really the drone, or that's the video equivalent of RAW versus JPEG, essentially. And so the D-Logs have to be processed a lot more than JPEG or the movie files.
Okay, so that was Iceland, now Greenland. And one of the nice things about Greenland was the hotel that we stayed at. Right outside the back door, you can walk out and get this shot. And in that same area, this is the terrain. This is another focus stack, and it's a pan. So there's a lot of images that went into this. And this is shot, I'm sorry. That is shot with a 100 to 400 millimeter lens, and I had a 1.4 teleconverter on it. So I'm shooting at about 520 millimeters here, just right out the back door. Now this happened to be the Red Sail group that we're going to go out on the next day. So this is the day before when they were finishing up.
And they had a beautiful sunset that day.
They had some light.
We did. So that same day, while I was waiting for the tour and such, I went on a hike, and there's a UNESCO heritage site there that has this huge glacier field. So I hiked up to the top of this mountain, and the image on the top is taken with a 400 millimeter lens, handheld, HDR pan. So there was just this one brief minute I looked out way out on the ice field that had the sun just pop through this little hole in the clouds and hit the top of those icebergs, and I'm like, I just have to try it. And I think it turned out pretty nice. And then this one down here, I actually pirated. You can see there's one little guy, and it gives you a sense of scale. There was another photo tour out there that didn't belong to, and they were positioning this guy to get their shots. And I'm like, well, I'm taking advantage of this. So I grabbed that one. This was on a similar hike the following day. The tourists, there's a lot of, in this particular town that we stayed in, they bring a lot of cruise ships up into this town. And the cruise ships, I guess, offer tours that they will take you out and on their little boats, and they'll get you on these icebergs, I guess. So these people that you see here are on the icebergs, but you can see sort of the massive scale. This is an iceberg that you see, this big pointy thing that looks like a mountain. That's an iceberg. And, the interesting thing about the bay that we showed before is that it changes, and it could change from one moment literally to the next. That, this area right here is where icebergs get plugged up coming off of this giant glacier. And when one of these things calves or flips over or something, it can just flood the entire bay with icebergs. And you can, it almost completely impedes travel because there's so many icebergs out there. It was very interesting to see. The day we left, it was just completely clogged with icebergs. None of the cruise ships were coming in. You couldn't hardly even navigate a boat through it.
One of the cool things about this little community was dogs. And we would hear dogs howling from one end. We were in a canyon of the canyon to the other. It was unreal, the amount of noise that they made when they were howling.
Yeah, the sled dogs there outnumber the people. They said it's about they outnumber. But you have to remember, in Greenland, people have cars, but a car is only good in town. There are no roads in Greenland to go from one town to the next. The only way to get from one town to the next town is either by boat or by sled dog.
Dinner time.
Yeah. So they were quite cute, but they were also kind of rough looking. So that big signs not to pet. Yeah.
So the next day was that 9/10 date that we based all these trips on. This is the day, and we had a beautiful 100% cloud cover.
Never saw the moon the whole time we were in. Never saw the moon.
So what did we get in place of it? Yeah, didn't see it.
So we did have, this is probably, for what we came to see, this is probably one of the best shots I had, at least. We got very close to this iceberg. You can see the red sail in the background. This is a 5-shot handheld pan from a moving boat. I'm just really pleased with this image. From a processing standpoint, one thing that I did a little unique is process the water that you can see in front of it with a little extra clarity, just to bring that water out, but only brushed it on that particular part of the image. Yes, ma'am.
You're using noise out of that. What do you see that big?
Color Effects Pro for Nick. So that's pretty much my standard workflow. Lightroom, and then if there's anything that you can't do in Lightroom, I'll go to Photoshop. And then from there to Color Effects Pro and then Topaz Denoise. That would be pretty much my standard workflow. So in Color Effects Pro, I have so for landscapes, I have a pretty standard recipe. It does a little bit of detail extraction. It will, sometimes I'll do some highlights. It's not a vignette, but it will highlight the center. Sometimes I'll play with that. I think in this case, I actually highlighted the outside. That's sort of a negative vignette to bring some light to the outside of the image. Tonal contrast, and then pro contrast, I believe is the last one. Yes.
You use the topaz after you use the.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, Topaz is the last thing, because I find that if I'm using Color Effects Pro, I'm doing tonal contrast and detail extraction, it adds some noise to the image. So the color, the denoise is the last thing I do.
So same image for me, from my perspective, what I was seeing. And then a few of the shots of the boat around some ice. Again, we wanted the full moon in this, but you know,
Yeah.
I can always Photoshop that. I'm pretty good at that stuff. So the interesting thing about this image is, yeah, we finally got to fly our drones. On the entire time that we were on the boats, there was only one day where we had nice enough weather.
Because of wind.
Right. So if you look carefully on here. There's a drone there. And if you look up toward the mask, let's see. Oh, it's covered. Is it? There's another boat, a drone up there right by the mast. You can't see it because of the label up there. And then, of course, this perspective is my drone shooting this image. And there's about 3 other drones out there that I don't know where they're at. It was kind of a scary time. There were like 5, 6 drones flying at the same time. You can see Keith. He's setting.
Probably ducking.
I think this is Keith's drone, and he's right there.
Yeah.
So we're doing our thing.
It was tricky getting all these drones on and off this boat. The guide that we were with offered to or wanted to catch all the drones coming back in. And I have a nice video of Olis. We should have put it in. Of Olis landing his drone back.
I didn't have gray hair then. Yes.
Yes, and they do that on purpose. These reds, apparently the red sails are not even real sails. They're just for show. I mean, I guess they can obviously move a little bit with them, but they're not like, you wouldn't want them as your regular sails.
So they just kind of all the way.
They do. So what's going on here is the icebergs are moving and we're on a sailboat and we're also moving.
Very close to dark.
And it's really dark. You don't have a tripod. One of the techniques to try to get a sharp image under those conditions is to shoot a lot of images per second. So in my case, I was shooting somewhere between 5 and 20 frames per second. I would hold that camera up, try to get a composition. Of course, I'm shooting raw because I'm going to be doing some post-processing because I've got to really boost the ISO up. One of the cool things I was doing was 3D tracking. So what I try to do is find an edge that was relatively the closest edge to me and the camera. So in this case, probably where I focus, right on that edge. So with 3D tracking, I'm sitting there bobbing around on the boat, but the track is staying right on that edge. And I'm shooting 20 frames maybe per second, trying to get something sharp out of that. My ISO, I'm setting it to auto ISO, and I'm saying, you know what? If you need to go to 1,800, that's cool with me. You do what you need to do, ISO. I'm controlling the shutter speed because I want to have at least a chance of getting a sharp image. And you're always adjusting that up or down, based on, I'm trying to stay right around 100th of a second, but, I'll take 50th if I have to, depending on the composition. The aperture, I'm leaving it wide open on the camera. So those are basically the settings in this environment. And this is shooting landscape. Would you ever think you'd shoot a landscape like this? Another example. And now to talk about the post-processing a little. In my case, I use Lightroom primarily, and I use the masking. What I meant to say is I primarily use masking in Lightroom. I don't use Lightroom general control. I use a mask, and I do all of my adjustments within Lightroom within the mask. Normally, my exposures are pretty close, so I'm not doing things with that. I'll go into Photoshop. There I like to use layers, and in layers, I'll be doing things like Topaz. And in Topaz, I'm starting to gravitate toward Photo AI. That's their newest version. And recently, within the last month, their releases of that software has really done well. I normally gravitate between Photo AI or Sharpen. Topaz, Sharpen are the two tools that I use from Topaz. And in Lightroom, I'll also make some adjustments for color, but that's my color tool, what I'll use. And that's pretty much it. And I do the same type of post-processing when I'm flying a drone or if I'm shooting a file from the camera.
And just the last example of shooting from a boat. So this was one of our final nights that we got out on the boat. We actually spent most of the day on the boat this day, and the little tiny bit of color we were able to get in the sky. Again, using topaz here because this was a really pretty noisy image by the time it was all said and done.
So what we did next was we left Greenland and flew back to Iceland for one night to catch a plane the next morning back to Jacksonville. And on the flight, maybe back, we were watching the weather and we kind of decided, you know what, maybe we should rent a car because it looks like it's going to be a decent night. So we land at the airport, we go to the car rental place, we grab a car for one night, and we come here. And notice that lighthouse on the horizon. So what I'm looking at is the sun is setting off to the left side of this image. The sun is setting. So I grab my drone, and from this position, I pop it back up behind that lighthouse, looking back toward the sun to catch that. And then a little bit later, after the sun set, I'm getting these images in the ambient light. And Keith gets his camera, regular camera.
Yeah, well, we hung. The reason we went to that spot was we thought there were going to be auroras that night. The aurora forecast was decent. The weather was pretty clear. So we hung out and we waited, and it was really cold. Olis was in the car, and I kept getting out and looking around. Is there any auroras? Is there any aurora? And I looked, and I saw that moon come up, and I thought the lighthouse. I'm like, I have to just run over there. I can get a good shot on this. So it was just kind of lucky. We kind of running around with the tripod on the lava fields in the middle of the night to get this shot, but it worked out pretty nice.
So have you ever seen those cameras that stick on a pole?
Oh yeah. So yeah, let me introduce the next before we start playing. So this is a little compilation video, I think, of our entire trip in Greenland. And it's a combination of drone footage, which you'll recognize, but also this Insta360. I don't know how many people are familiar with the 360 cameras. I really love this little thing. It's just so fun. You don't have to do anything with it. You just kind of hold it. And then there's software that they have after the fact will allow you to reprocess the image. So you can reprocess the video or even still images off of it. And you can take the same footage and process it many different ways and come up with completely different results. But this combines a little bit of drone and a little bit of Insta360 into a quick little video. Unfortunately, the music's not on. The music's kind of cool. That was just me holding it and process everything. Got a couple more slides. So Olis actually recommended that I talk to you guys about tiny worlds. So this is something that I've been really enjoying doing recently, especially with the drones, because you get a completely different perspective. I don't know how many people have actually done a tiny world. You can certainly do it without a drone. You can do it with your camera. But I wanted to tell people how I do it. So this was a sunset that we captured. You can see the glacier up there and you can see the sun setting. So this was done with a drone. And the way you create these is you have to do a 360 pan. So capture the whole 360 degrees, and then you create the pan in Lightroom or however you create it, put it into Photoshop, and then you flip it 180 degrees over and you make it square. And then you use filter, distort, polar coordinates. And this will create a circle with this. And then there'll be a seam, a small seam that you have to then clean up. Now I'm going to show another image in just a second, but this image was just shot from a drone up high, shooting a pan like this, 360 degrees. And what you see that's interesting is that little point in the center, so that everything comes into the center, because when it does the polar coordinates, it brings everything back to a point. There's no detail in that one point in the bottom. The next example. So this example was actually just shot in Mandarin. This is a Julington Creek Bridge. And what you'll notice that's quite different from this image than the last is the center of the image. And the center of the image here actually has detail because this was shot as a vertical pan. So it's basically looking straight down, shooting 360, then shooting 360 again, then shooting 360 again, then shooting 360 again. So there was about 200 images to make this particular image. And it was not at all easy to paste together in Lightroom. But I think it gives a very different perspective because you get to see directly beneath and below. So, and if you need, I'd be glad to give you more tips on this, but it's pretty easy to find YouTube videos on how to create tiny worlds as well.
So it's changing, right? I mean, how you shoot landscapes today are changing from the way they used to be. Cool stuff.
Yeah. Questions?
Any issues with local laws and regulations on drones, or is there a good resource to
Do you mean here or elsewhere?
everywhere?
Yeah. So in the US, maybe go to that one slide you have, Olis. So in the US, the DJI drones have there's a couple things that, first of all, the DJI drone will tell you if you try to fly, will tell you if you're in an area that's restricted. Also, there's an app called Before You Fly that you can use to, BFU Fly, that will also tell you a little bit about it. So areas around here that are restricted, airports, military bases, there's a lot of restricted areas in this area. But these tools will actually help you quite a bit. As far as foreign countries, you need to check the local law. So in Iceland, national parks, so all national parks in the US, no drones. Iceland, the same, no drones in the national parks. However, there was a clause that said if you speak to a ranger and they give you permission, then you can fly the drone. And apparently we didn't have too much trouble finding rangers, and they really were pretty amenable to us flying as long as we weren't doing stupid things.
And typically you could fly them like at 6 p.m. or fly them
in the
before
morning
8 a.m.
or the evening, which is really when you're going to take pictures anyway.
War thereabouts. The landscape. I didn't quite understand why we shooting that.
Well, when I was talking about depth of field, I was talking about it in relation to focus stacking. If I'm focus stacking, I'm going to pick a very shallow depth of field because I want lens performance, the optics of the lens to works better than if you shoot it like at f/16. You get distortion, start getting some stuff. So if you shoot at f4, f5, or f6, you're going to get better optics out of your lens. When I'm shooting a landscape and I'm not doing focus stacking, I will pick maybe f8 or f9 or f10, somewhere in that range.
In some of the other images that we were shooting shallow depth of field, were because of the amount of light that we
Right.
had.
So if I'm on a boat,
Yeah.
you know, I can't,
So you gotta get you have to get your shutter speed up high enough on a boat. And then you don't want your ISO to go too high. So the only other thing you have to manipulate there is your f-stop really. So, yeah. Other questions? So, we should have included a couple images as we were leaving the town on the boat. They were pulling a whale up onto the beach and processing this whale that they had just recently harvested. And then we went just a little tiny bit further and a guy was processing a bunch of seals. So, it's not like they don't, I don't know what they all did.
I
But
think they're fishermen mainly, because another thing we saw were buckets
Subsistence.
full of sea urchins.
Sea urchins, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so.
They're subsistence, fishermen, farmers, I guess not really farmers. So we spent a couple hours on the sailboat to get there. And like I said, I thought there was less than 50 people that lived in the town. There was one building that had running water. And they had one little restaurant there, and there were two people running the restaurant, which I guess I didn't understand all the details, but I guess they had been hired by the company that owned the restaurant there, and they were like on a 1 or 2 year assignment. And it was a couple, husband and wife couple. And the food was,
It was excellent. It was some of the best food of the entire trip.
yeah.
No,
I don't think most of the people ate in the restaurant every day. I think, there were people that were lined up to get into the restaurant, but I don't think it was most of the people. Most of the people that I saw eating in the restaurant were not from the town. They came in by boat.
hi, Jim.
Very. It was, freezing.
When you're out there shooting the auroras for 4 hours, it gets a lot colder than what the air temperature says it is, but it wasn't terribly cold because we actually went in September.
Yeah.
And probably the coldest we experienced, I don't know if it was ever 32. I don't think we were.
Yeah, it was, but
Nothing
it's a
freezing.
very, just like Florida, it's a very wet cold, really gets you. So, yeah.
West, on western coast.
Well, that's where we got the auroras, but we were,
No,
in Greenland, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Greenland.
It was
You're
western
correct.
Greenland.
You're correct. I'm sorry. I was thinking Iceland. Yes, Western. Illicit. Illicit.
You have to look at rooms actually.
It wasn't that extreme there. They have a range. Mine goes to about 11 degrees, up to about 104 degrees, and we never were in that threshold. The big thing is your battery, right? Keeping your battery relatively warm. That was just never an issue there when we were flying.
You're talking about the camera using one of the stacking, are you now using the nighttime mirror?
Yes, they're mirrorless.
What do you do with your photos?
Presentations?
Obviously the book of Mandarin, but you have this, as you read them, gorgeous pictures. What do you do?
I enjoy them. I used to try to sell stuff like this, but I don't anymore. It's just my own personal enjoyment. It's like you guys. Same thing you probably do with your photos, I do with mine.
I try to sell mine, but I don't have much luck doing it. I don't try very hard. And so, yeah. And I actually use, I'm in the PPA, Professional Photographers of America. So I use some of my better images for competitions.
We took a trip to Iceland in end of July. And we saw a lot.
Yes.
More than you. We were on.
I was curious, in this group, how many people fly a drone?
Just one. Okay. How many times have we crashed? Never. So,
Keith, Keith got the drone first and took me on one of his drone shoots. And about a month later, I got my drone. But one of the reasons why I was holding off was because of that. I was worried that, you would spend, in my case, a couple thousand and, crash it in the ocean or do something. But they're remarkable, the technology in them and their ability to come back. I really see a big transition for photographers like us, including people in this room. It's a phenomenal tool. And in my case, I think of it as, well, I pay that much for a lens, and when I get that, I get this other capability that comes with it. So it's kind of cool.
They are remarkably stable. They tell you when they're out of batteries, they're going to want to come back to where they started. For doing just regular photography stuff, they're much easier than you would think that they were. Now, when you start doing things like recently, I just went out and did a photo shoot. A guy wanted me to photograph his boat as it's running through the water. Then you're not in the same place where the thing took off, and you don't want it to go back there because you're not there anymore and you have to find it. That's a little bit more challenging. I was really a little nervous there, but in general, if you're taking off and coming back to the same spot, it's really pretty straightforward.
Bags that you can store, transport.
He has a little bag. I honestly, if I'm going to go on a photo shoot, I mean, what we did in Iceland, we had our camera bag with our lenses and our cameras, and it would just fit in the bag. And mine's about the same. If I'm just taking the drone, I'll take a bag about like that. But otherwise, if I'm going to go just photographing for the day, I'll just throw it right in the bag with all my other photo stuff.
So those are the two drones that are on the table. Some details on them, and the one that's about $1,000. It's just about as good as the one that's twice that price. So, and this is always changing. I mean, it's like camera technology, but even faster. They are evolving these things pretty rapidly. And once you get past the fear factor, once you've flown it 5 or 6 times and you're starting to really get some confidence in it, it becomes a lot of fun. And it's a lot of new photography opportunities.
It allows you to think of, the opportunities in a completely different way, for sure.
And it's not replacing the other, it's supplementing, what you can do. Merry Christmas, guys.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I finished that Zoom.